So, hello gamblers and Grimmelkinds, my name is TB Skyn, and welcome to yet another of our sort of relatively frequently recurring Legends of Runeterra card review streams, where we take a look at whatever cards have been added to the game most recently, talk about what the art of those cards is doing, how it's working, and just try and give it a little bit of a review of how good they happen to look. And as some people are pointing out in the chat, as we're talking right now, is Lulu got a little bit of a sort of post-launch update for her card art after she was launched, with some artwork that people felt was like less than fully great, and I tended to agree with that. It didn't look perfect. It looks a lot better now. Not much point in commenting too much on it. It's just a simple fix job. Anyway, might as well start with the very emblem of annoying in League of Legends, which is Zoe herself. And basically, that's kind of the whole point of her champion card art, is to display her as being exactly the character that she is. Like, going cross-eyed, sticking out her tongue, yeah, and flying through portals. The storytelling in this card is pretty damn clear about how you should feel about Zoe and what kind of a person she is. And certainly she bears that out in her voice lines, which I've listened to in the actual game itself, where she's like, yeah, Riot have basically sort of surrendered to the idea that Zoe is the most annoying thing in League of Legends, and they're kind of leaning into it. She is a little bit odd in League of Legends because she is, like, the most Disney-proportioned pretty much of all. Like, this is face straight out of, like, Disney's Tangled or Frozen. That makes her just sort of a little bit odd. She stands out a little bit among a lot of the other League of Legends characters. Like, if you look at even someone like Leona, who also has a bit of a Disney face, right? Like, she has a bit of that sort of wide-eyed Glen Keane beauty thing going on. But still, like, Zoe is sort of disproportionately contorted in that sense. They're really playing up her childishness. They're really playing up her cuteness. They're really making her look a little bit, I think it might be intentional that they're making her a little bit uncanny, just to kind of play up that she is like an ancient trickster god from beyond the realms of time and space, who is also fourth wall aware. She understands that she's in a card game called Legends of Runeterra, because she can dimension travel, and so it's like, in the same way that Aurelian Sol essentially dictates his own card art flavor text, so does Zoe. There's also an emphasis on her connection with various strange animals and space creatures, which is something that comes into play with her follower cards, which we'll look at a little bit later on, where there's an elephant somewhere that pops into existence and causes trouble. Yeah, here he is, the Startled Stomper. That piece of her storytelling is also done in the Zoe card art itself. As for framing, this is something we've talked about extensively when we talk about Legends of Runeterra cards, is that the cards tend to have frames built into them that are supposed to guide your eyes and help you sort of identify the important subjects in the picture, but which also become helpful when it comes time to having, like, when you have to frame the damn card in this little, like, rectangular block. It's nice to have a frame in the card itself that you can kind of sort of fit things into, and then everything outside of the frame can sort of be incidental details that don't really matter. For example, the frame here is Zoe's portal through time and space that creates a literal frame around her. But then everything else, like, here is the giant pillar. We have, like, her legs sticking out in the background. We have these flowers. Who gives a shit about the flowers? They don't really matter. They're just background sort of filler to sort of fill in the rest of the space, while the actual character art of Zoe and the little ferret creatures that she's got actually takes the center stage. The same thing happens with the lighting. Like, if you pay attention to the way that the rest of the scene is colored, this is, like, very sort of relatively cold hues of color. And we've got lots of grays and browns and grays, a little bit of blue, maybe a little tinge of purple in the background, but mostly all of the color in the image is centered right on Zoe herself, which again helps draw your eye. Contrast is a great way to draw the eye, and you can create contrast either with, like, light and dark, or you can create it by using, like, very desaturated color and then highly saturated color right in the middle. That can be an accessibility issue when it comes to color blindness, but I'm not really an expert on that subject. Which moves us on to her second card art, which again, remember we talked about in terms of framing. Here we have Zoe's portal essentially cutting the image in half and creating a frame over here for all of the interesting stuff to be in, whereas over here is legs some hair, some floaty stuff. And then here it's like animals and poros and Zoe and more animals and things with wings, and like all the exciting stuff happens over here. And again, you can kind of see that being signaled with the use of light, because over here we have this bright light source, which is the portal, and then we have Zoe's face lit up. We have the light sources of the creatures themselves as they spring into existence. That creates a lot of light, creates a lot of color over here, and then over here things are just a little bit more sort of downplayed, not as active. So again, your eye is drawn here, and it creates a natural frame for Zoe's card art to also fit into, which I think works, quite frankly, in a lovely way. And again, the storytelling being done here is pretty solid in terms of like telling the story that Zoe creates these portals not only as a means of traveling between dimensions, but also she brings weird and strange creatures into being. And in fact, you can see the trunk and a little bit of the elephantine face of the startled stomper right here in her splash art, whomst we will come back to as we move along. Don't think she has any minion cards in her following there, so we'll move on to Dear Riven. And Riven, let's start with her leveled up card art, because one of my frustrations with Legends of Runeterra's card art is that sometimes they create like really interesting, diverse characters, especially like female characters, where, okay, we try out some different body types for different kinds of characters, like in order to signal different kinds of things about who this person is, what kind of life they lead. And then sometimes it's just like, who the fuck needs a spleen? Who needs a liver? Who needs internal organs? Let's just squeeze this shit down as tight as we humanly possibly can. And then she swings a giant sword around without having any core muscles, what the fuck soever. Like, even if this is a corset, it's like, seriously, as a character design point, when Riven is like living this farmer life where she's like lugging around tons of hay and doing hard manual labor in the fields and shit, and then like occasionally doing warrior stuff, the basic, like the 101 way to communicate what kind of life she leads is to at least give her like a physicality that matches her activities. And Legends of Runeterra has a tendency, unfortunately, with characters like, especially Senna. Let's find Senna for a second, because she's like the most egregious example. Let's find Senna for a second. They have a tendency to like default to just making the characters, especially female characters, like really fucking slim, just incredibly slim, for no goddamn reason. Like, occasionally that kind of thing can make sense. Like, sometimes you have a character where the design kind of, it makes sense that they're excessively slim, or they're wearing a really tight corset and they're really trying for that wasp-waisted thing. Some of the like noble people from Son, or not Son, from Noxus or Piltover, like some of the people who are like sort of very image concerned and care very much about their appearance, yeah, sure, makes sense that they would wear like an exaggerated corset to really exemplify that. But fucking Riven, farmer girl who lives in Ionia and like occasionally brings out her sword to kill people, really? Okay, fine, whatever. It bores me, it annoys me, but whatever. Looking at the card art itself, once again, the framing here is a little bit less obvious, but you do have the tree here, and then the swoop of her sword, sort of creating a little bit of like this circular space right here that Riven dominates, not only in terms of her physical presence, like she's towering. Our eye line as observers is, like, our horizon is somewhere down here, right? Like, the horizon line, if you look out into, is really low to the ground. So we are, in terms of our position as viewers relative to Riven, we are very much below her, looking up at her. She's towering over us. She's dominant in the scene, which of course makes sense with the storytelling, because she is being stalked by these Noxian hunters, as you may have read about in some of her recent lore. They're trying to take her back to Noxus and punish her for desertion or whatever. And now she's like, oh, you guys have come to kill me. Well, it's too bad that I have a giant magic sword, so I'm gonna kick the absolute ever-loving crap out of all of you, which she immediately does because she has the giant sword. So the sword dominates, Riven herself dominates the image, and the Noxian assailant over here is much closer to our eye level, like visually below Riven just in terms of the height of the image, but also tiny and small compared to like the overbearing figure of the champion herself. So the visual storytelling, for all that I'm not a huge fan of the way that they've designed her character, is very much on point here. Like, it does the job of telling us exactly what's going on and why we should think that Riven is cool. As someone is pointing out in chat, yes, her thigh here is probably wider than her waist right there. So, which again is like, not for this character. Like, it makes sense for other characters, but not for this one. Jesus. I do appreciate they've given her the Furiosa makeup thing going on with her eyes, which I thought was a really nice addition to Riven's character. Something that they've sort of added in recent years. I don't think it's on her base splash, on her base character model in League of Legends itself yet, but it's a cool thing. It kind of hints at the idea of her being tired and scared and stressed out, which she kind of is all the time because she's full of guilt about everything all of the time and has trouble forgiving herself. Much like Yasuo, a character who she should have a lot more interactions with, but oh well. Right, moving back to her level 1 splash. Compare and contrast the storytelling in this one with the storytelling in the level 2. First of all, let's look at the angle. This is what in filmmaking you would call a Dutch angle, which is when you tilt the camera to make the horizon line be off balance. Now, in card art like this, it's also sometimes used just to make a little bit more diagonal rune in the image, to make things fit into the composition better. But here, part of the effect, like I said, Riven is in control of this image. She's dominating. She's standing there with a very, like, steady posture. This person is basically falling over. The Dutch angle helps that sense of disempowered chaos as contrasted with Riven's control over the situation. Compare and contrast with the level 1 splash art where she's not in combat, she's not fighting, this is the calm before the storm, and our horizon line is rock steady, completely flat, completely horizontal as it should be down here. And rather than us being completely on the ground, we are somewhat, like, not completely, but somewhat more eye level with Riven. She's not domineering over the scene. She's not, like, standing over everything and swinging a sword around. It's more like we're sitting on the ground. She's walking around carrying some hay because of some stuff. And we're like, Riven, there's some people here to see you, I think. It's the moment before the thing happens. And you can kind of see that in just the way that the scene itself is composed. We have all these falling leaves that are at once kind of peaceful, but also it's a little bit, oh, the wind is kicking up, kinda. Like, again, this calm moment right before some shit is about to go down. Riven's posture reflects this as well, where she actually has a much wider waist here, I think, than she does in her level 2 art, which again is like, anyway. And I think she has more muscle mass in general too, which is a weird decision. But Riven's, like, her posture and her behavior reflects this too. This is a much more relaxed Riven. This is a Riven who's not really concerned about taking control of the situation, who's a little bit at peace in this moment, like right before these assholes come along to ruin the thing. And looking at the composition again, we have the tree trunk here, and then the branches out, creating a little bit of a frame, not that much of one, to sort of help center Riven in the image, like to help guide us to where we need to see. But there's also space around Riven pretty much everywhere except with the wheat, right? Like, none of the Noxians here, like, they're not behind her, and they're not, like, encroaching on her. They're all sort of a respectful distance away from her. So she still has this sense of not being threatened. Like, they're there, they're probably gonna attack, but she's not in imminent danger, which again adds to the sense, like, the feeling of the scene, that this is not a moment when you were supposed to be really tense yet. It's a moment when the tension is about to ratchet up. And there's a secondary framing going on here between the wheat, the tree, and then Riven's outstretched arm with the wheat itself that creates a little frame around these two figures, which means that when you see the card for the first time, probably first you'll see Riven, then you'll see these two, and then you'll see this lady. Not necessarily in that order, but the eye is being guided a little bit to identify, oh, here's a space, a frame, and, like, here's and then over here, which again, from a compositional standpoint, is pretty good, because again, if the characters had been overlapping each other, if they'd been kind of peeking out from behind Riven herself, that would have centered a lot of the visual interest right around here. So spreading it out a little bit more creates a more, at least in my opinion, a more balanced feeling across the image, which I think is very nice. I also really dig the use of colors here. Like, we have sort of the golden wheat, which is sort of desaturated and not too pumped up with like yellow colors, and then you have these bright red sort of autumn looking leaves. It's probably just normal summer leaves in Ionia, but it has this autumn looking feeling. And the sky is a little bit pale, and there's mist sort of hanging over the landscape in the background, so you get the sense like maybe it's early morning, maybe it's a little bit cold and damp, like it's like brisk, nice sort of nature scene. It's just, it's a really nice vibe, this image. Right, Riven has, like, she has her sword being gradually reassembled. Moving on to Soraka, whomst I don't believe we have looked upon yet either. And again, this image is all about storytelling. It's all about telling the story of the relationship between these two characters. You have this young lady here who's being very surprised, essentially, like this. She has some kind of magical connection with these little creatures. Soraka is teaching her to heal, and she's like, oh god, what am I doing? I don't know, And you can see that not only in her expression, but in her posture as well. You can see she's kind of unbalanced, like her pelvis is kind of tilting one way, her body is tilting another. So she has this kind of weird off-kilter posture. She's not really looking confident. And you can see Soraka, like, literally lifting her hands into the correct position and doing this sort of kind, maternal guiding thing. Here's how you do it, little one. Like, I'm going to show you how to do the thing. Which, again, tells the story of who Soraka is as a person. She's someone who has very much dedicated herself to be a guide, a mentor, a healer, a helper, a friend, but not necessarily to be like the leader, the one up front, the one doing all the action. Someone who's trying to guide other people towards being better. And like, the storytelling here again is very efficient because Soraka is leaning into this, leaning into the girl. She's steadying her. She's helping her. You can see the other arm coming around, like, on her back, just holding her steady, saying, I don't know, you've got it, you've got it. And so you get the sense of the relationship between the two because the girl is focused on the little one whose horn, I believe it is, that she is healing right here. And Soraka is looking at the person whom she's trying to mentor. Which I think works really well. Like, it's a really nice little character moment. And so again, a little bit of framing going on here. We have the mountains filling up space on the left and right, which creates this sort of V-shaped frame in the image where Soraka and the girl stand out really nicely against the purple of the sky. And then we have the secondary main characters of the piece, which is, first of all, this Stellacorn, and then the rest of them all around. And I do like the strange details we get about, like, just the environment of Targon, where rocks just float. Like, they're just hanging out in the air, chilling, and nobody really minds, which presumably means they're not falling. Again, the vibe of the image is very nice. I do also like the contrast. You have the deep dark teal and the green of the grass here at the bottom that gives away sort of almost gradually up the slopes of the mountains to the white and the brown, and then we have, like, the purples and the reds and the pinks of this, like, setting sky with a little bit of an aurora borealis peeking, like, it's a really nice color transition. It just looks really pretty, especially in the transitionary phases, like when you have, like, the Stellacorns contrasted with, like, they're all bright and blue, right? But the grass is, like, really sort of a dark shade of green, and they contrast with it really well. It's just a nice way to compose the colors, to make sure that things don't clash and don't interfere with each other, but they complement each other the whole way. It's just lovely. And I like the expression on the girl too. Like, she looked kind of surprised and scared, but more about, like, but not in a sense of, like, I'm in danger, but more in a sense of being nervous about what she's doing, which is kind of a hard expression to capture sometimes. So, another frame is being constructed in the image right here. Again, with the storytelling, we have Soraka being framed by all of the people that she's healing. So she's in the center of this gorgeous golden ritual of healing, and she's in the center of the crowd of all the people that she's helping, many of whom show up in other cards that we might look at later. I believe this is the Broadback Protector, if I'm not mistaken. And this is what's she called? The lady who does some calling Stellacorns, something. We'll get to her later, but she shows up around there later as well. So this is like an image of Soraka, where if here she's like deliberately not taking center stage, she's helping someone else excel. She's being the guide, the healer, like sort of putting herself back a little bit, not being the main character of the piece. Here, she is Soraka the goddess, like Soraka in the center of everything. Soraka whomst is doing the most important thing in the room, and there's a couple of ways that that's shown. First of all, she's center in the image. She is lit up by the golden light that she's calling down from above. But look at the other characters as well. They are essentially, outside of the golden light that falls on them, they're all rendered in grayscale, more or less. Like, you can see little snippets of color here and there, but they're essentially rendered in grayscale. And Soraka is the only person who's, like, fully colored in the image. So again, there's this contrast that draws your eye to her. Which works really well. Like, it both indicates that these people are being acted upon by some kind of magical force that's illuminating them in a weird, sort of semi-unnatural way. but it also helps, again, center Soraka as the main character of the piece, the one who is doing the thing, which also comes through in her pose. Like, she's essentially T-posing for dominance here. Which is like a very classical, like this is the pose of like the prophet who is parting the seas, or who's speaking to the congregation. Like, it's, if you look into Christian imagery, you'll find this kind of pose happening a lot. Like, saints and leaders and prophets and politicians will do this, like, arms outstretched wide to the sides, head held high, like confident posture dominating the scene thing. So the body language is doing some really nice storytelling as well. That being said, they've created an interesting dynamism in the pose, because like her chest is essentially pointing out this way. Like, you can kind of see that, like, that's the direction that her rib cage is pointed. But then she has this twist in her hips where her crotch area, and where she's got one leg forward, pointing more sort of out this way, which gives her this little twist of her posture, which is a little bit more interesting than if she had just been standing like front facing with no dynamism in. It's a little bit more visually interesting. It's also, something about it confuses me a little bit, because it kind of looks like she's like pointing her pelvis and her chest in two completely different directions. That maybe, and it's partly because of the way that she's wearing her clothes. Like, she's not wearing pants, for example. She just has this long tunic thing that flows down over. And the belts, that sort of confuses the anatomy a little bit for me. But that's not, like, this is not really the important part of the scene. This is the important part of the scene. Soraka's face, her, like, serene expression, her control, and her dominance, again, over the space, where everyone else is just looking upon her, looking at her, looking to her, looking towards her. Because she is in this moment like a star, like a goddess of the stars come to Earth to heal the faithful, essentially. And the thing she's casting here would presumably be Wish. Right. Hello, Anna. Dear SHYVANA, in terms of character design, SHYVANA is one of those characters who Riot have essentially said that they do want to rework her. Like, they want to give her a completely new character design. And I'm given to wonder how much they want to rework her exactly, because usually when you look at someone like, for example, Nocturne, it feels like this design for Nocturne is a pretty good guide for what Riot eventually want to turn him into, once they get around to giving him the visual update that he so desperately needs. Like, good lord, he needs a visual update really badly, and this seems like the kind of direction that Riot is probably wanting to push him in. So the question is whether this is an indication of what they want to do with SHYVANA as well, where they don't really change a lot about her fundamentally. They give her some gloves that make more sense. They give her clawed feet because she's a half-dragon person. But other than that, they sort of keep the helmet, half-plate design thing that she's got going on with the bare midriff and the scales on her own body. I would like it if they leaned more into SHYVANA actually having scales of her own, rather than just being, like, purple-skinned, to make her a little bit more monstrous. That would be interesting, and it would tie in well with her story. But, you know, who knows? That's outside of Legends of Runeterra, anyway. So, similar to the Riven image that we discussed earlier, SHYVANA has pretty much very much the same thing going on. We are far below her. Essentially, it almost looks like we're falling out of the sky, as though she's just punched us in the face and sent us flying. And we're looking up at her, and she's very literally looking down at us. Like, not even bothering to look down with her head. She's just staring down from this chin that's lifted up over us. It's an expression of confidence, and again, visual dominance, but also, like, combat dominance in this instance. Like, this is, you're unworthy of my power, you're beneath me, I'm gonna kick your entire ass, you weak and useless fool. It's that kind of pose, right? So it's sort of a Maleficent pose, if you ever watched Sleeping Beauty. And that extends also to the way that she's interacting with the scene, because again, much like Soraka is doing, she's spreading her arms out, making her visually bigger. And, of course, she also has her arms on fire, which, again, lends some more contrast. Because she's outlined mostly against, like, the sheer white of this Demacian battlement, and then the white of the clouds, well, white, orange, gray, and all the other colors that exist in clouds, and then the blue of the sky. And then she herself has this dark purple hue on her skin, this bright, flaming orange all over, like, her legs and her arms, the red armor, and the golden accents, which make her stand out really strongly in this environment. compare and contrast, if like she had been framed in front of like a golden Demacian statue, she wouldn't be able to contrast nearly as much with the environment. So like, again, the color choices, the framing choices are sensible and they're good. And again, speaking of framing, the walls of the Demacian fortification help cut off some of the image and create this frame up here so that we can focus on her face and her upper torso and like this spread out power pose thing that she's doing, and then follow the line of her body down into her thighs and then into her feet, which some people in chat seem to be enjoying a whole lot of... yeah, you seem to be enjoying that entirely too much. Let's move on to the next version of her. So, Dragon SHYVANA. This is one of my less favorite cards from this particular expansion. So, storytelling-wise, this is happening in the next moment after we see her here. Like, this is her essentially getting ready to transform, as far as I can tell. And then here, she has taken to the sky. We can see the same characters standing against the same battlements down below. Clearly something that has been scarred by a fire attack of some kind, which, in terms of the storytelling of the game, is probably Cathragan the Infernal, whom SHYVANA is seen to be battling in his card somewhat later in the skies above Demacia. He seems to have that same kind of fire that would probably leave those kinds of scars on the environment. Whew. I'm talking very fast, aren't I? But yeah, this is one of my less favorite cards, and there's two reasons for that. First of all, SHYVANA doesn't look quite as big as I would have liked her to here. Both because we're looking at her head on, so like most of her body is kind of hidden behind the bulk of her chest, so we kind of just get her legs and her tail poking out from under there, where I feel like if we had more of a full display of her body, she would look more powerful and more sort of intimidating. And the same thing with the wings, where we get this, like, the wings, of course, are flat, but with big flaps of skin that help her fly, but we're looking at them kind of straight on, so that they don't really have much volume in the image. And so the result for me is that this version of SHYVANA looks a little bit small, and looks a little bit spindly, like especially along the arms, a little bit fragile in some ways, which... yeah, is that the best way to frame her in her most powerful, superpowered dragon form, really? Is that... could have done something else, and that's kind of compounded by the angle from which we're seeing, because this image is partly trying to continue the storytelling from the previous one, right? So we need to see the battlements, we need to see, oh, same Demacian, same battlements, this is the moment after she has taken flight, so we're looking down at her from above, which again, kind of erases that sense of overwhelming power that she had in the previous image, which from a storytelling perspective, like, it's probably necessary, but just kind of a pity. Like, I really wish that instead we could maybe have been looking at her from the perspective of the people on the battlement. Have one of those guys in the foreground looking up at SHYVANA's enormous form, taking flight into the sky, to maybe with a little Catragan sort of in the side of the image so we could see what her target was, something like that. Here, it's just, she just looks a little bit confused, and her pose is a little bit unclear, and it's a bit of a pity. The colors are still good. Like, we still have, like, the greens, the browns, the whites, sort of these very neutral earth tones all over the background, against which her molten, fiery, lava-like form is beautifully contrasted. So that part of the image works really well, I think. Now, my friends, we move on to Tahm Kench. I shouldn't do a southern accent, it's a bad idea. One of my favorite champions in the game, one of my favorite character designs, just because it's very inspired to have a champion whose entire MO, like a demon whose entire being, whose entire, like, function as a character is about catfishing people, be a literal catfish. That's just, like, it's very on the nose, but it's also kind of brilliant, and, like, using the tentacle feelers as a mustache, essentially giving him a tiny little top hat that just kind of sits on top of his head and looks silly. Like, he's a delightful character design. He's very cartoony, he's very overblown, and I really like him as a character. Like, we can talk about the problematic aspects of having, like, a demon of gluttony who's, like, fat and, like, which is, like, such a trite way of using that type of body, especially in a game that's otherwise so fucking petrified of having fat characters in it anywhere, if they're not to be made fun of or coded as evil, but whatever. That's a different discussion for a different time. So, framing. Tahm Kench has this throne behind him, and along with a table, the throne itself creates this visual frame in the image that gives us, like, a central spot for him to occupy. He's also completely centered in the image, which, again, places him in control of the scene. Then there's the lighting. We have his henchman standing here behind him. We have the person who he's tricking, currently reaching out to sign a contract with him, the poor idiot. But they are all in shadow, in the background. Like, they're imposing and they're scary and they're there, but they're mostly sort of grayscaled and desaturated compared to the luscious red colors of Tahm Kench's beautiful throne, and, like, the greenness of his skin contrasting against that red backdrop. And he's all lit up from the top with his golden light of opportunity, essentially. So you can see the seductive aspect of the character, right? It's like, I sit here surrounded by all this wealth, son. You could have it too. Like, you can see, you can kind of sense that feeling of, like, he's leaning in over the table and his big fat gut, which he's hoping to fill with this poor person, is kind of spilling over the thing in anticipation, as though he can't wait to get a taste of his meal, and then that giant smile. Like a smile that reaches up past his eyeballs. His head is like 50% just mouth waiting to consume. And this is a scene of seduction. It's not sexual. Well, depending on... Some people in the chat are definitely sexually seduced by Tahm Kench, which is valid, I believe. But it's not a sexual seduction. It's a seduction of a different kind. It's a seduction of hedonism. It's a seduction of, like, I can give you everything you have ever wanted if you'll just sign this one little contract for one little thing in return. That is a seduction as well. Just a different kind of seduction. I like that even the ink of the quill is kind of excessive, right? Like, spills and blots all over the thing. There's too much of it. Everything about Tahm Kench is about excess. It's about too much. Too much. Not good for you, but you want it anyway, right? Like, the thing that you know you shouldn't want, but you really do want it. My friend, I know that expression. I can see you feeling like the cards you're holding ain't the ones you deserve. You got a desire for the finer things, don't you? Perhaps you'll allow me to satisfy your hunger, let you savor all that you ever desired. All I need's your name, scratched on my paper, and you, my friend, will be satisfied for life. With no stipulation of just how long that life is going to be. And speaking of excess, if this is Tahm Kench before the trap snap shot, and he gets his meal, and he gets to gorge on the souls of the innocent, this is Tahm Kench when the deal is done, and he has had his satisfying meal, as we can see with the boot of his poor victim still present on the table itself, as Tahm Kench picks a leather belt, out of his teeth, and seems to have swelled and grown even larger with the body of his victim, which... it feels like the waiter here in the background kind of saw what happened, and he's like, oh, Jesus Christ. But yeah, again, talk about the change in angle. We have a little bit of a Dutch angle in this image right here. We can see that the horizon line is a little bit skewed. The scene is a little bit off kilter, but not enough to really kind of scare you. But then we get here, and the horizon line is bonk. Like, the whole scene is completely tilted, and it's tilted in Tahm Kench's favor. Because he's contraposed with, like, you have the tilt of the horizon line here, right? But then you have Tahm Kench's smile and his posture creating this contraposed line right there, creating this intersection, which makes this feel like he's leaning into the tilt as though he's the one causing it, or as though he has some kind of control over it, which gives him, again, this dominating presence in the scene. And there's, again, a change in perspective, where here Tahm Kench is leaning towards us, inviting, offering a hand, like he's in control of the scene, but he's not dominating it, he's not domineering it. Here, it's much more of a, I have gotten everything I wanted, and you are now so far beneath me as to be a bug in my salad. Like, you get this sense of, oh, this is when everything has gone right, when he has gotten exactly what he wanted, and some poor fool has been taken for their very last ride. And you can even see the throne itself. Like, it's the same throne that he was sitting on here, right? Like, it's the same, like, bright red kind of environment, furniture. But here, this same kind of furniture with the bright red, same kind of swooping curves, but this is a wide seat. Like, it's spreading out, it's expanding all over the place, which, again, he takes up much more space in the scene right now. And, like, it works like gangbusters. Again, the storytelling here is really good, and I do like the little dainty Little dainty, like the knife in his teeth, picking out the scraps and remains with the little finger pulled out. Because Tahm Kench is a classy lad. He's a classy gentleman. He wouldn't dream of having bad table manners. But you really get the sense of the character, don't you? And again, my favorite part of Tahm Kench's character design will always be the little tiny hat. It's the little itty bitty hat on the top of his head. That's way too small for him. It's such a good detail. It makes him look bigger, essentially. Very nice. And again, the couch is acting as a frame along with the table, which centers Tahm Kench. The lighting is all on him, centering him in the image. And then we have the secondary character, which is this poor waiter, and a tertiary character, which is one of his big toughs who are just standing guard for the big frog man. Moving on to Glorious Revolution, or Evolution, yes. Victor, with his Glorious Evolution, again, a very obvious framing going on here. We have, like, the mechanical arms and the metal rods and stuff over on the side here. Creating a space, a frame in the middle for Victor to occupy, which is then accentuated by the arm and the laser, creating even more of a constrained little space here for Victor, where he's doing his robotic invention stuff. And as I talked about with Victor before, again, with his character design, I feel like a guy whose whole deal, like whose entire thing is, I don't care about the limitations of the human body, I will make as radical a change as can possibly be needed to achieve every possible goal and improve myself. It's a little weird that the only real cybernetic augmentation he has is like one extra arm. Feels like he should have more stuff going on, like maybe 4 legs, or like just he should do something more radical with himself, which he sadly doesn't even do in his leveled up version, where he's just like looks exactly the frickin' same, which I feel like in terms of storytelling, there's a little bit of a missed opportunity to show him in one state here with like a few augmentations, but not too many, and then move on to the level 2 where he's just got like 3 extra arms and like lightning guns, and like he's really transitioned into something much more robotic and dangerous than he was. But you know, c'est la vie, c'est la vie. Anyway, once again, the lighting is doing the job of framing Victor. We have the light of his invention spilling down onto his chest and his face, which highlights those parts of his character for us. And yeah, the composition here is a little more chaotic than we've seen with the other characters we've been looking at, right? Like, there's much more sort of jagged lines flying all over the place, and even around Victor himself, we have these wires and we have these little details, and like all the detail on his armor and his body and things sort of poking into the space. It creates this sort of chaotic, frantic energy, as though a lot of stuff is happening in the scene all at once, which of course it is, which again helps tell the story of like Victor is this like frantic mechanical genius inventor guy who's doing some sort of magical stuff with a laser and the thing on his staff, which is Hextech something, probably Hextech crystals. And it does a fairly good job of that. I feel like it could be more, like more could have probably been done to really accentuate that chaos. Like we could have more done with the background space, which is essentially just a bunch of flat colors that sort of create the impression of a great vaulted laboratory, but not really much of a sense of the kind of space that it is. Like, there's little things that could have been done, but Victor is at the center of the image itself, as well he should be, because he's the champion in the middle of the card. But we get a different scene in his level up. Here we're pulled much further back from Victor himself, rather than this sort of intimate medium close-up that we have in the level 1, where we're sort of in his space, we're kind of next to him, seeing him do stuff. Here, we're much more pulled back. We're watching him do his thing from a distance. And once again, we have the Middenstock henchman showing up here. We have the robotic mimic character showing up here, and other characters that may or may not show up in cards here and there in the expansion. But here we're pulled back and we're watching Victor lead his glorious evolution into actual action. And what's odd about this is that most of the light is actually here. It's on the henchman walking through the wall. Victor himself is only really lit by his lightning rod staff thing that he's got going on, which makes him stand out a little bit less from the rest of the scene than other characters that we've looked at so far. Remember, pretty much every champion we've looked at will be lit up, like there'll literally be a spotlight on them, lighting them up ahead of everything else. Here, he's much more sort of pulled back a little bit. He's mostly stands out by virtue of standing on top of this pile of rubble, having his eye line above everyone else. So your eye is naturally drawn to him. He's just less highlighted, which I don't know if that's an intentional thing about, oh yes, because he's about the evolution and he's not really self-centered in that way, which kind of doesn't jive with the character for me, but who knows. This is another one of those splash arts where, like, these card arts where it's like less favorite of mine, because I feel like more could have been done to really kind of power Victor up. Again, notice that the eye line here is completely static. Like, we have a completely perfect flat horizon line, where I feel like if you'd done the thing of tilting the angle more, you'd get more of a sense of chaos, like he's just blasted through this wall and stuff is literally still falling down from the ceilings, and this is a scene of chaos, and like Victor bursting into some room to say, "Glorious evolution, all of you will be turned into robot minions. Yes, please go into robot pod now, thank you." Like, whatever. I think he's robbing a bank here, probably, or something along those lines. Like, more could have been done to really emphasize the chaos of it and sort of thereby emphasize Victor's destructive powers, but such is life. Right, and that was the last champion of the expansion, I believe. Yes? Yes, I think so. Which leads us on to the Pesky Spectre, and this is a lovely little character piece. Because we have these two gentlemen, who I believe we've seen before. They're adventurers who are on the Shadow Isles, who will be killed in terrible ways later on. And then we have this guy right here, who's just like, he's just like hanging out. "Oh, I say, chaps, you're roasting some lovely sausages there on the fire. Well, did I tell you ever about the one time when I was in the woods myself? Roasting sausages. Oh, I believe it was in 1403. Or was it 1407? Never mind. I strapped an onion to my waist, which was the style." Like, he just looks like a dude who's just telling a really annoying story that none of them want to listen to. Look at this guy's expression. He's like, "Oh my God, just go away, Jesus Christ." He's so done with this guy. And, like, this guy's like, "Well, actually, I think there's another party of adventurers over there, if you don't mind awfully going away and messing with them instead." And saying, "Oh, no, I've got plenty more stories to tell you, whippersnappers." Which works well. And again, think about the stuff we've talked about already. We have the frame right here, which is like the arm of this guy, as well as the tree and the rocks and the backpack and the stuff, creating this dark space, like with pretty much just a little bit of tree in the background and this dark sky against which the ghostly gentleman is very well outlined. So we get this space for the ghost person to occupy, which separates him from the living. Like, they're literally from two different places, which emphasizes the storytelling thing, that he's not with them, right? Storytelling-wise, this tells us this guy is intruding on these two people's space and time. Like, he's being a bother, he's being a nuisance to them. They're leaning away from him. This guy is looking away from him. They don't want anything to do with him. And he's sort of trying to intrude on their space, lean into where they're sitting, lean into what they're doing and annoy them and bother them. And so the storytelling, again, just in terms of the composition, is really on point, frankly, I think. I think maybe they could have lit up the ghostly gentleman a little bit more, like given him maybe some white accents to really make him shimmer, but that's a minor thing, and maybe that would have brightened him up too much for the scene itself. Again, color contrast, the ghostly gentleman is all greens, teals, and sort of bluish hues, but the two living people have lots of fleshy redness and like skin tones, and lots of like warm colors in their clothes. We have the red, sort of red, brownish red pants of the older gentleman here. We have the big, fat, orange waistcoat of the guy over here. We have the bright light of the fire, the sausages. Like, this is much more earth tones. This looks much more alive. Whereas the space for the ghostly gentleman up here looks a lot more withered and dead. So again, the storytelling is doing a whole bunch of good stuff here. Then there's the rune in the dude's hand, which is glowing green, same as the ghostly gentleman. I'm not sure if the ghost guy is trying to get the rune, or if this is a rune that summons annoying ghosts to bother you the whole time. What exactly the story is there, but clearly this guy is intent on holding on to it and getting the ghost guy to go away. Then we have this guy, armed gearhead. And again, lovely bit of character piece here, because you'll take one look at this guy's face, right? And you're like, yeah, he's probably pretty annoying. Like he's maybe he's not evil or something, but like it's like you run into him on the streets and he wants to tell you about something. You're just like, no, go. Like, I don't want to sign up for anything. I already support a charity. I don't want to tell you what it is. Just go away. Leave me alone, please. He looks cocky. He looks overconfident. He has a dumb hairstyle. Like he just looks vaguely annoying, like you don't want to know him. But he's also very proud of the thing that he has created here. And so, look at the composition. We have this arm thing here, and then the upper part of his shoulder, and then the robotic arm itself creates this frame around his face, which is further emphasized by all the, like, the edge lighting and the highlights on his face in this character. We're not really highlighting the face itself. That's not so important, because the most important element is the arm. But it creates a frame for, like, his expression and his stupid hair to be in, which then, because we're looking at his eyeline, what's he looking at? Ah, I see. He's looking at this bright, shiny robot arm that he has attached to himself in a manner that looks kind of painful and uncomfortable, but, well, I'm sure he's thought of that stuff. So you have these two, not two characters, but we have these two elements of the scene, which is the guy who is, like, overly proud of the thing that he has, and the thing which he is overly proud of. Which, again, storytelling-wise is doing a good job. And then, for the rest of the image, it's mostly just clutter, really. It's mostly just clutter and filler to avoid having too much empty open space around, I suppose. I don't know about this scene. Like, it feels like this robot arm is a much cleaner type of technology than all of this sort of industrial-looking background would imply. And it's also not clear to me whether this is like an operating theater where he's putting the last touches on his, like, surgical graft of an arm, or if this is like a laboratory where he's just hanging out shirtless for some reason. Like, the environmental storytelling to me is a little bit unclear, because it seems to not have been a priority. The priority has been the characters himself and the thing that he's attached to himself. Then we have the Blade Squire. Talk about a different scene to the Armed Gearhead, where the Armed Gearhead is, like, all about dominating the center of this frame. The Blade Squire is a very different mood to the scene, right? Like, if you look at this image just now, just without any preconceptions about who the card is about, who would you say was the main character of the image? And it's a little bit, well, the monster, I guess, because it's the biggest one and it has all these highlights and it's like takes up most space. But then on the other hand, the monster is all the way shunted out here to the left, which is weird. That's not usually where you put a main character. But then these characters are like way too undetailed and they're looking away and they're not really, like, they don't seem to be engaged with anything that's happening. So you don't really arrive at this guy as the main character because the image is screaming, oh, him, he's the main character, him, we care about him, he's important, he matters. We arrive at him as the main character kind of by default because he's the only one who has this negative space around him, who has this little bit of a framing with the mountains sort of creating this open space of air above him. He's not screaming that he's the main character, but he just, okay, this image is probably about him. It's probably about his journey with these huntresses to go and do the thing. These are the people, by the way, who are going to Ionia to try and catch and kill Riven. But this is a picture of their journey through Ionia on a particularly rainy day. So we arrive at the Blade Squire sort of by accident, which you get this sense of his smallness, right? Like, he's not big, he's not dominating the image, he's not posturing, he's not doing anything to imply confidence or power. He's just kind of there, trudging through the rain, pulling the reins of this giant basilisk creature, carrying a big fat backpack, and being ignored by everyone else in the picture, right? So you get this mood, this sense of the scene of what's going on. What kind of feeling do we have here? Well, it's rainy and it's sort of vaguely bright, but it's overcast and it feels kind of miserable and exhausting, and nobody seems to be having any fun whatsoever. Which is like, yeah, because he's a squire. He's a small, unimportant cog in the machine. He's this character who doesn't really much matter to anyone else because he's just essentially a glorified servant, right? Lovely. Absolutely lovely. In terms of storytelling, that's really well done as well, because it kind of proves that there are other ways to tell stories in card art like this than to make everyone like the main character or to make them dominate over the space and be the most important thing in the world. You can also create an environmental mood piece. That's just like, just look at this scene. and think about what it says. Moving on to something completely different, here's a boxing scorpion. How cool is that? I love these characters. I love the CRUSTY CODGER, and I love, let's see if we can find him, the Boxtopus. He's the Boxtopus. Look at this coolest fucking character design I've ever seen. Look at this guy. Ah, it's Petra. He's called Petra, but he's got a Scottish accent. Or Pablo, rather, yeah. It's like, I love these characters. I love the whole storytelling around this entire stupid scene, that this is this like underground Bilgewater fight club where it's like old-timey 1920s dressed scorpions and octopuses box with each other for the entertainment of the crowd. That shit is just fucking funny. Ring the bell, will ya? I'll show that pointy fart that I've got my nickname. Aye, 8-Punch Pablo, the Kraken, the Tentacle Terror. Your wee stinger is going to be crying for your mammy by the time I'm done with ya. I love these characters. They're so good. Like, I want a cartoon about them. Like, that's what I want. It's like, it's just sheer SpongeBob characters. Like, that's basically what they're, SpongeBob characters who showed up in Legends of Runeterra and got a little edgier. I love these guys. Anyway, framing. The stinger itself helps with that. We have the tentacles of poor Pablo, who's getting his ass handed to him, probably. Creating a frame around the guy's face itself, where he has these magnificent whiskers and giant eyebrows that make him look a little bit less insectoid. Or, well, scorpions aren't insects, they're arachnids, but it makes them look a little bit less sort of bug-like, and a little bit more like he has a humanoid-ish expression on his face. Which is needed, because otherwise he just looks like a freaking monster. Like, if you didn't have these little elements kind of humanizing him, he would just look like a freaking monster. And then just the detail of, like, the boxing gloves have wonderful details on them as well. You can really see the crinkling of the leather. And, like, you can see, like, they're well used. Like, the stinger point poking out of the front of the tail, which is, like, such a good little detail that the guy's clearly cheating. Anyway, lighting as well. There's not a ton of lighting the same way, but like no other character in the scene is lit the same way that the CRUSTY CODGER is. Like, we have this guy in the background, you can sort of see his expression, but everyone else are just like shadows in the light that shines down on the scene itself. And a little bit of color contrast. Like, everything in this scene is pretty much sort of warm colors, lots of reds and browns, but this guy is much more saturated red, which makes him stand out again also. Lovely hat. I love it. Let's move on to the Boxtopus right away, because that's the second half of the image. Again, look at the storytelling. We can see that poor Pablo the Boxtopus is a little bit down and out here. Like, he's got a black eye, he's like being patted down with water by his trainer, who's looking really rather distressed by his opponent right there. He's at, like, getting one tentacle patched up by the other guy. And then we have the CRUSTY CODGER still in the image, but look at what's being done with his body. First of all, he's being used as the frame, right? He's the frame in which poor Pablo is being posed, but he's also huge in this image. He's huge. He dominates the scene. You can see that he has control over the fight just by the way that the two characters posed relative to each other, with this guy literally towering over Pablo, like, up top here. And there's also a very different mood in the background. When you look at the CRUSTY CODGER, the background, like, we have this very much like a flat eye line. There's no Dutch angle going on here. But also, just look at the background. It's very clear. It's very sort of staid. There's nothing really happening here. But then when you look at the Boxtopus's perspective, all of a sudden you've got this motion blur going on. Like, this sort of, like, the whole scene is in motion. Everything is moving. As though there's speed happening. You can even see it on the floorboards, because the CODGER is, of course, charging at Pablo before he's actually ready to fight, which is why this poor guy is like, oh shit, I gotta get out of here right now. And Pablo is putting up his dukes, because he's not backing down from a challenge, ya tricky CODGER. And I just love his characters, and he's got a little mustache tattooed on his skin. It's a little mustache, a little old-timey boxer mustache. And he's got, like, the big sack thing that Octopus has that kind of pokes over forward. Like, he's got this big, giant, stubborn forehead thing. It's like, gorgeous. It's just absolutely wonderful composition. You get such a good sense of the characters just by looking at him. Like, he's this stubborn old idiot who's not going to back down from anything, even though he probably really should. I love these guys. This is some of my favorite cards from the expansions. Boxtopus. I'm easily entertained. Right. Picks we've looked at. The Porofly I don't think is new either. I don't believe so. Which moves us on to the Ballistic Bot. Wait, have we looked at the Stygian Onlooker? I think we have, yes. Oh, and as someone pointed out on the subreddit, this card matches really well with the foreground of the other card. Not quite perfectly, but very close, which is a fun incidental detail. Anyway, the Ballistics Bot. We saw him last in Victor's level up splash art, where he's threatening some random dude. He's hanging out down here, threatening this dude, pulling at on his collar, being like, "Oh, are you gonna join the glorious evolution, or are you just gonna be a total square about it, buddy?" But now, here he gets to be the main character of his own image. And he is undeniably a pretty cool character design. Like, I gotta say, like, just, he has this, like, bounty hunter bandana thing over one of his eyes, and this cape going on, and these sharp angles. Like, you look at the design of his body, he has all these sharp, jagged pieces of metal all overlapping that kind of look like almost a knight's armor or something along those lines, with the one spine coming out of his pelvis and just reaching into the ribcage. As though he's halfway between a skeleton and a knight, essentially. He's like, he looks a little bit undead for a robot, basically. And this giant frickin' cannon arm, which he has just used. And again, the framing here is this debris, where whatever the hell it is, that he has clearly just blasted a giant hole through. And again, the pose, the way that he's composed in the image, like he's got his legs spread out, he's got one arm out to the side, he's got the big giant cannon dominating and domineering the scene. You get the sense that he's in control of whatever it was that just happened, which works really well. But maybe the best part of the image is his little tiny sidekick. Like, this little guy is like, oh dear. Like, clearly the C-3PO to this guy's R2-D2. We all know that if R2-D2 had a giant arm cannon, he would be blasting holes in everything as well. This little guy with, like, his headlight eyes, and, like, this worried expression and this giant, like, mouth that forms this big, sad face, like, oh dear. I'm a bit worried about that. You get the sense of how timid he is next to the, like, merciless killer instinct of this cool-ass bot. Absolutely lovely. And again, the little bot is framed by the body of the bigger bot and the little bit of debris here. We get this little frame for the little bot to occupy so that once we've looked at the big guy, our eyes naturally transition down to the little guy. And again, this guy's towering over us. His head is very, very high in the frame. He's looking down at us from our perspective. There's a super chat. There's artwork for a leaked follower on Reddit, and I'm wondering if you would look at it later. No, I don't look at leaks on my channel, generally. Like, I try to avoid that, just because, like, I know people who work on this game, and they hate once this stuff leaks. We'll look at it once it's out. Like, there's really no rush. So, the Dragon Guard Lieutenant. So, here, again, we are looking at clearly a scene in continuity with SHYVANA's card. We're looking at, like, the same environment, the same scorching has happened. He's right up here, looking out over the whatever, as SHYVANA's jumping into the air in order to transform. And we can see the destruction and devastation that has been wreaked by whatever it is they're fighting, which again, presumably is going to be that giant dragon SHYVANA fights later on in the higher numbered cards. So we get, again, this storytelling going on, which is something Riot has done so well with Legends of Runeterra, is that they really do incorporate a lot of sort of through lines and little narratives and little stories that play out through the splash arts, or through the card arts, in a really nice way that I'm a huge fan of, because it makes it so rewarding to go through these card arts and just see, oh shit, Cythria is in the background of this one. Oh, it's the same story with SHYVANA with the doing the thing. That's cool. I guess little rewards just for caring, which I think is lovely. So once again, framing, we have the mountains and the smoke plume and just like the battlements themselves giving way to this bright blue sky, which becomes the backdrop against which the lieutenant here is standing out. And he's standing next to SHYVANA, right? Like, it's difficult to be the main character of an image when you have a half-dragon, like, muscle goddess standing behind you getting ready to kill something. But because SHYVANA is not outlined against the bright blue sky, but against this dark, rocky backdrop, and she's, like, lower in the image, and she's a smaller character, he gets to be the main character all the same, which is how framing can do the job of creating a main character in an image, regardless of what their character design is. And that's, again, very well done. We have a little bit of a Dutch angle, which, again, opens the sky up a little bit for this guy to be looking out. Like, you get the sense that he's scouting for whatever it was that did this thing before he sends SHYVANA out to, well, kick its ass, basically. And that works pretty well. And for the character design, these are interesting as Demacians, I think. Because, like, one of the problems that SHYVANA as a character design has had for a long time is that she doesn't make a lot of sense as a Demacian, right? Like, because Demacia is all about, like, sheer white and blue and gold. Like, those are the colors that identify everything that they do. Like, that's Garen, Lux, not so much Jarvan because he's an old character, but Xin Shao. Like, this sheer white, blue, gold, maybe some earth tones and browns, but certainly not red and gold and, like, fire colors and oranges. That's not really what the Demacians look like. But then we have these special people who are the Dragon Guard, who dress themselves in this particular set of colors for their uniform, which then gives SHYVANA a place to belong in the lore, which I think is a very clever way to sort of retroactively retcon a way into the lore for her to fit in aesthetically, where before she absolutely didn't. So, you know, that's the way that goes. So that's a clever little move. I do like the uniforms themselves as well. I like the asymmetry that we have, like, the shoulder guard over here, and then we have this cloth thing over there. They look kind of distinguished and like officers in a cool way that I quite like. Anything else in this image that's worth commenting on? Maybe not so much, really. I still like SHYVANA's new character design. Like, just the fact that she has scales that mimic the shape of the armor itself, and the armor itself, of course, is mimicking the scales of a dragon, so that it fits together really nicely. I hope that they do a good visual update on her, where maybe they make her a little bit more actually monstrous than she is right now. Like, just push that a little bit harder, but I like where they're going with it. Anyway, we have been going about an hour, which means that I need to cut here for a second in order to create an episode that can go up on my second channel, which is why you're going to see the Patreon crawl come up on screen right now. And I'm going to say that if you enjoy these videos, then like, comment, subscribe, etc., etc. I have a Patreon, merchandise store, tip jar, blah, blah, blah. And if you want to support me in any way, then you can do that. But if you're watching on stream, don't worry, we're still going. I'm just going to take a little bit of a break to turn this into an episode so people can watch this, you know, without having to go the full 5 hours or however long this is going to take.